I'm Mark Newton. I'm based at the Rail Delivery Group in central London. As mentioned, my role is as advisor in respect of policing and security matters for the United Kingdom's railway companies. We're a trade body. We represent all of the train companies in the UK. There's 23, the way that we're split up. But I'm the single point of contact in respect of policing and security matters. We have a dedicated police service that polices the whole of the national network, and I interact with them. In a previous life, I was an assistant chief constable with them. So, having done 35 years with the police, I've moved across to the rail industry and now advise them. This presentation's I'm going to run through today is a piece of work I did with Cambridge University, and we were testing the effectiveness of body-worn cameras on rail staff. We were buying these and rolling these out to frontline rail staff with some regularity, but of course, when we looked at it and started looking to support the business case, intuitively it felt the right thing to do, but there was no evidence that these actually really work. Some people said, "Oh, CCTV is the answer," and various different things had been tested and implemented across our networks. But in terms of the use of body-worn cameras, did they actually work? What was the evidence? There were some companies, both nationally and internationally, that said that they'd proved it. When we looked at it, they hadn't. They'd done some localized evaluation, but there was no apples being measured against apples. And so we went and spoke to Cambridge University and talked to them about an evidence-based trial, a randomized control trial, which has led to a peer-reviewed paper that this presentation is based upon. And I hope that at the end of it, those of you that are in the operation of transport might get some value from this. It is a quick skip through for 30 minutes, but in terms of the detail, if anyone wants to contact me, my email will be on the last slide, and I'll happily answer any questions, or you can link up with me on LinkedIn, etc., by the usual sort of methodology. So, very grateful to the British Transport Police, who helped us with some of the data. Grateful for Axon, who provided all of the cameras for free, and we worked with Cambridge University. I'm hoping that their status speaks for itself in terms of the methodology that was used. And the randomized control trial is in fact the highest form of evidence, which led to this peer review paper. Just a bit of context for you, really. Next, I'm going to just slip to the next slide. He says, there we go. What you see here is the level of violence that our staff suffer. We move about 7-8 million people a day pre-COVID, of course. Dramatically dropped now. Interestingly, violence and crime hasn't, but that's a separate presentation. But what we do have here is a continual trend of violence against rail staff and some of the contractors that we use. We use some contracted employees. Rail staff are deployed in the UK in frontline positions, mainly in rail operational roles such as seeing trains off, dispatching trains, etc., but also in keeping the system safe, customers moving, and importantly for us, protecting the revenue box, which is where a large number of the assaults take place. Large number of assaults related to revenue. A large number of assaults relate to antisocial behaviour and drunkenness in the nighttime economy, and the trend, as you can see from that graph, continues to rise. That's the end of 2019. The trend has stayed around that particular line through 2020. We did see a dip at the beginning of COVID when our numbers dropped by 80% in terms of passengers, but interestingly, as I said, the level of violence continued to rise. So we needed to do something, and we needed to do something. Body-worn cameras seemed to be a potential solution that we might want to deploy, and some were buying lots of them and buying into pretty slick sales pitches. But there was little evidence that they worked apart from localized evaluation. The numbers was up 16%. And when I talk about violence against staff, we don't categorise it in the rail industry in the UK the same as criminal law. In criminal law, violence is defined, namely, by a physical injury. Well, in the rail industry, we count it slightly differently. Sometimes we have violence threatened against staff. We have certain antisocial behaviour acts against staff, which is counted as violence. This trial that I'm talking about now just dealt with physical violence. So when I talk to you about what you could achieve through body-worn cameras, we're talking about what you could achieve with body-worn cameras against physical attacks, according to the evidence that we achieved through the randomised control trial. 60% of the violence against our staff is relatively low level, and I don't decry it. It's if it happens to you every third day, you start to think about whether it's worth going to work. But we have a 60% of violence is relatively low level, and in 32% of cases, the suspect is identified. We're pretty CCTV central across our network at the moment, but it doesn't stop people for some reason because of they're either unable to rationalise the fact that there is a CCTV camera 20 foot above them or 20 foot behind them, that they're going to be identified. But 32% of our offenders are quite easily identified. They're not the master criminals. They're passionate people that have blown up for whatever reason and assaulted one of our members of staff. In 18% of our cases, there was a reluctance by the staff member to pursue a prosecution. There are various reasons why that's at that high level. Some of it is very much to do with the complexity of the criminal justice system in the UK. It takes a long time and creates a degree of dissatisfaction. So better to stop it happening, perhaps in the first place. In fact, not perhaps, definitely, than to then prosecute it afterwards. And you can see on that chart, you can see the breakdown of the numbers, but we are talking around about the 8,000 mark in terms of offences against staff. It was the first randomised control trial that had been launched in respect of this particular subject. If you do an academic review, you will find body-worn camera randomised control trials in respect of the effect that they have in violence, in policing situations in particular. There are some in prisons. The first one was, in fact, a British study in West Midlands Police. That's in our sort of middle of the country around Birmingham. But there was nothing about the commercial benefits of body-worn cameras. So we launched this in partnership with the police, which was the bit at the top of the British Transport Police, the BTP. Cambridge University, who we've got a really good partnership with, and we've done a couple of randomised control trials on the effect of hotspots on mass transit areas. Again, I could talk all day about that, but I won't. And then we wanted to involve technology companies because they were very keen to prove the benefits of what they were trying to sell. And TOC in the middle, that means train operating company in the UK. And as I said, there's 23 of those. We did it across about 7 train operating companies. It's the first ever randomised control trial on body-worn cameras in respect of rail staff. We wanted to prove the concept. The way we sort of approached this, we just identified the top stations in terms of violence. Some of those stations, if you've been to London, as I'm sure in your cities, some of these stations are like cathedrals. They're at multi-layers. They're at, that we have, tens of huts and tens of platforms coming into various different levels. So there's a lot of barrier lines and there's a lot of rail staff interactions that take place. So we effectively just chose 30 or so, 33 of those stations, and then we broke it down in terms of barrier lines at those stations. So King's Cross, for instance, that is in central London, it's where a lot of traffic comes into North London. That's on 4 different layers, and we have something like 90 barrier lines there. We split them in half in typical randomised control style way we split them in half, and we used body-worn cameras on half, and we didn't use body-worn cameras on the other half. So we had a control group. We did this over 6 months, and we recorded all engagements. The only material that was kept was if we needed it for evidential value, which we handed over to police because there was an actual assault that took place. Randomized assignment. I mean, there'll be those of you in the audience that are very, very aware of this, but in effect, that quite simply breaks it down. What we did. We gave a treatment to 135 staff. The treatment is wear a body-worn camera, and a very similar amount of staff did not wear a body-worn camera. And we measured what happened over 6 months. When I say wear, switching it on, switching it off, is it live, is it not, is it showing the screen so you can see yourself being recorded? None of that applied. All we wanted them to do was to wear the thing. To be frank, we had a huge amount of problems with unions. We had unions saying we are not going to allow our staff to use this thing. It's a spy in the cab. You're going to use it for human resource purposes. You're going to use it for discipline purposes. And it took a lot of effort on mine and others' parts to walk around the various different offices of RAL staff to convince them to allow us to do the trial. At the end of the trial, and we're a few slides away from that, but at the end of the trial, guess what? They decided they were going to go on strike because we were taking the cameras away from them. So, and fortunately, we were able to talk them out of that because we decided to allow them to keep them. But it just shows, we're a very unionised industry in the United Kingdom, and we had to work very closely with those unions who represented the staff to convince them that we were not interested in how long their tea breaks were, their coffee breaks were, or their cigarette breaks. We were interested in the violence that was being offered to them and how we could present that. And we wrote a protocol that I'm more than happy to share with anybody that is thinking of doing this. But that's what you can see is basic randomized control trial. And here's some of the baseline data, and this is just Toki's Train Operating Company. So you can see the treatment stations, there were 15, an average of 138 type assaults at each of those stations, and the number of gate lines at those stations that we gave cameras to was around 21. There was around 30 staff at each of those 15 stations, and you can compare that. I won't go through the whole data there, but they're very, very similar types of locations with very similar numbers of staff. And the only thing that we did different, and they were very similar types of people coming in from the same types of communities. We measured it over a complete 24-hour period, and the only difference that we applied was that at the treatment stations, they wore cameras. At the non-treatment stations, they did not. So, on to findings. We didn't believe this. 47% were less likely to be assaulted when equipped with body-worn cameras. So, when I got this through from Cambridge University, and again, let's just bear in mind, Cambridge were not going to publish this unless the data was checked and double checked. They've got an esteemed reputation, and rightly so. They told me, no, we checked it. It's right, Mark. 47%. We can't believe it. I said, no, you do need to go back and double check that. Just have we done something wrong here? Have we skewed this in some way? The answer is no, we haven't. That's the evidence. If you wear a body-worn camera in a frontline railway environment in the United Kingdom, you are 47% less likely to be assaulted than if you do not. And that's the evidence, and we've gone with it. We started off with a very, very low number of body-worn cameras in the UK, but based upon this, through the various different industry groups that I push and influence, we've gone up from like 600 units, dropped around the country. We're up to about 10,000 units now, and we are seeing that the drop in violence. The reduction, there's a 26% reduction in assaults against all employees, which this is quite interesting. So in areas that we weren't measuring, I don't know, the ticket office, some retail areas, some where you've got train staff patrolling doing something else, the whole station had a dissipated benefit which we didn't expect. We saw a 26% reduction in assaults against all employees. So what I'm saying here is and the only explanation Cambridge could come up with, and we could come up, was that members of the public travelling through that were predisposed to violence or antisocial behaviour decided that it was too tricky because they thought all staff are wearing them, and so this was just in the stations where the control groups were. So we again double checked it, and it was right. We had a 26% reduction of violence against staff in the whole stations. And as I said, if you consider somewhere like Waterloo, King's Cross, London Bridge, these are stations that have multi-millions of people travelling through them every day. But we saw a 26% reduction against all staff. A much higher reduction in the areas where the people were wearing them, but 26% reduction again. And when you compare that against stations where there was zero, quite interesting for those trying to bring some tranquility to railway stations. We then started to work out the numbers. We started to work out what does it mean in terms of the operation. Well, in the UK, the average sickness period for somebody assaulted in a railway environment is 3 days. So that means 3 days of cover. That means 3 days overtimes. Generally, we don't employ more people. We just get people to work longer hours. But importantly, we try to encourage customers onto our networks and to buy tickets and to engage with us. And we want them to feel safe, and they're to be safe and to feel safe. And that perception of violence is really important. And that level of violence coming down is very, very important, a big sales pitch for us in terms of getting this done. We worked out that we could stop around about 3,000, reduce 3,000 working days. This is through, if you remember, I said physical assaults. So this isn't what the full gambit. If we actually included all types of assaults, someone being threatened with a knife and then someone running off, or someone being subject to antisocial behaviour, if we included all of those, if you extrapolated the numbers, just in the UK alone, we'd save about 18,000 days of sickness. We haven't gone the next step. The next step, people are asking me to let's do some work on what the impact would be then on trauma and extrapolate those numbers. So the build up of trauma on railway staff who suffer assaults on a day-by-day basis, and what's the reductions we could achieve if we did it that way. The numbers are relatively low. I mean, we're not violent. We're not, I don't want to paint the picture that we're a really violent network. We're not at all. In fact, we as you can see, we have very limited amount of crime across our network. But frontline staff do suffer the most. I get asked, well, what about criminal justice outcomes? Well, I purposely didn't measure that. I wasn't overly interested in what the justice outcomes were. In the West Midlands police trial, the evidence is very clear. Where police use these cameras, people plead guilty quickly. Justice is quicker. Justice is achieved much more effectively. People don't have to go to court as witnesses. Complaints are less. This wasn't what we were measuring. We were measuring purely the impact upon the violence and and that huge percentage that we talked about is what the evidence is. I'm moving to sort of key messages now, and sort of trying to distill this into language that both staff and those responsible for the strategic operation of our network would understand. So we sort of, what do we tell staff that we've discovered here? Well, it's pretty simple, isn't it? Wear the body worn camera and you'll be safer. It's about you. It's about keeping you safe. It's helping us. It would help us prosecute those that assaulted you. It mean you wouldn't have to go to court so often. Bottom line is, put the camera on and use it, and it will keep you safer. Pretty straightforward staff messaging. The key messages for boards. So we we wanted boards to just get the fact that this was of commercial benefit. Those loss of days have got to be paid for. This is, we are. I said, we're a commercial body. We sell tickets. We have one of our big overheads is staff. So as a good employer, we don't want our staff to suffer violence. So this is proven. This isn't sort of some sort of pretty poor evaluation that's been done. We've done this with some of the best minds in the world in Cambridge University. Larry Sherman, a friend from America, and Barak Ariel, who's a learning professor at Cambridge and at the Hebrew University, were the lead minds on this. But it in terms of well-being, it adds a huge amount, and we pushed this to our boards. We've spoken to the whole of the industry. It's a very diverse industry in the United Kingdom. We've got train companies, Transport for London, Network Rail. We've spoken to the whole of the industry and shared all of our findings with everybody, because we're so interlinked, and we want it to be as safe as possible. I suppose one question that does get asked, and I may get asked now, but I'll just touch upon it in sort of conclusion. And just for those organising this, I'm sort of on my last slide. So I get asked why the reduction? Well, for me, and talking to the professors and seeing this live on the ground, there were two really significant things that happened. One was the obvious declaratory effect is, I'm wearing a camera and I'm recording you, and your behaviour is going to be recorded. You can see yourself on the screen. The chances of you escaping this are very limited, and it was a calming. Wearing that camera was a calming influence. Some of our companies wanted to put little spy cameras in buttonholes. They didn't like the fact they looked too military. They didn't look like a good customer service thing. Our advice is, don't do that. If you want the effects that we've proven, you need to show that they're wearing this thing, and this thing it could result in a bad outcome for you if you decide to behave badly towards one of our members of staff. The second thing that we noticed is that staff behaved differently. We do train staff. We train them. We spend a lot of time in conflict avoidance and customer service. However, people are people. But we did see a huge amount of staff behaving differently, and we could prove that by the level of complaints that dropped by members of the public. So attitudes changed, and that sort of escalation of violence that those more au fait with that science than I will explain, but that conflict that then escalates into a violent situation was de-escalated at a very early stage, because the customer behaved differently, the staff member behaved differently, and we didn't have the violence.